Yeah, well, Emily, so sorry, I just heard your name from Tripit. So there's no, besides the title, there's nothing else on the diploma. So there is no second signature needed, so.
Yeah, so I signed it and then, I don't know.
Did you have a chair?
Signed it.
Did you
My
have a
chair was joining the Monday.
Okay, that's it. So because I don't think we would have a problem with that.
No.
And if we do, you record it and they can judge.
Okay,
You can check out.
so, but is it like a separate document or?
No. So there's no separate document, but we have an external committee member from the Board of Examiners in
Yeah.
case you become convicted to
Yeah.
judge that we are
Yeah,
judging right.
yeah.
Yeah, but the signature is still from the chair and you on the both diplomas, so it's not, you'll get the diploma anyway, so.
Oh, so it's on the same diploma?
No,
Just like an
it's two
extra-
different diplomas, but the signatures are the same.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully nothing will go wrong.
In any case, like,
You can continue like this.
Yeah,
And you got both
You
on the
have
same
the
day?
rights to do as you please.
I got the paperwork like next week. But I like signed it on the day. Someone else signed it.
you might. No, go ahead. So we can start now, officially?
Let me just check if they can see me. Yeah, they can see that.
Yeah, okay, so hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the defense of Ettore Arpini. I decided to omit the middle part. I think we can continue in Portuguese because half of the committee and half of the audience speak Portuguese. So you have the option to choose, no, I'm joking. But yeah, so I'm going to introduce the committee. So Igor, that is pronounced Pessoa. So Igor Pessoa is from the University of Amsterdam, the Center of Urban Studies. And he's, so he's one of the committee members. Then we have Tripik Verma, who you probably know from IPA, from the Maths Department. Then we have Juliana somewhere, right there. Juliana, are you there? Gonçalves?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so that's her. So she was with us, but she's starting in the architecture faculty soon. And then it's me, so I'm Amina Gorbani, I'm from the Energy and Industry group upstairs from the ESS department. So the way we're going to do this is that Ettore is going to present for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we will give the floor to the audience if you have any questions. Then the committee will start. Then we will convene at 12 o'clock. We'll go and discuss his grade. After that, we come back, give his grade, and then party.
Yay.
Until the end of the weekend. So, yeah, the floor is yours.
By the way, I'm so sorry I've been pronouncing your name Emily this entire
It's
time.
absolutely
And
fine.
I've never,
I've heard 20 different pronunciations of my name, and I like them.
I understand. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Ettore, as you all know. And this is the moment I've been looking forward to for some 2 years now, and the day I've been working hard for some 15 years, actually. So I'm very, very glad and thankful to share with all of you. If you're here somehow, we're a part of it. A very special thanks to my wife, Louisa. If I didn't say this, she was gonna kill me. Just kidding. And obviously to my committee, who's here in Juliana. So today I'm going to walk you through my research. Urban Commons as a driver of inclusion, a social spatial analysis of the accessibility to urban commons in Amsterdam. And by the end of this presentation, you will hopefully understand what an urban commons is. We'll be able to recognize one walking down the street. You'll understand how important and relevant they can be for policymaking, and also the factors that influence their accessibility and their inclusiveness. This is the agenda for today, but I'm just going to essentially just walk you through the research and just show you some key highlights and main takeaways. You can actually look at the full report of the TUDEP repository. It's already online, or ask me any questions Please be nice. Just kidding. Okay, so let's dive right in. So as we all know, the world is urbanizing rapidly, and this is the first time in history that we have more people living in cities than elsewhere. The thing is, cities only occupy about 3% of the world's surface. So as you can imagine, this creates a lot of pressure in our urban space. And this is an issue that's only going to get worse, as we're expecting 2.5 billion extra people to live in cities in the next 25 years. And this pressure on space actually promotes inequality and segregation, because, for example, because the real estate price is skyrocketing. And this is a phenomenon that we're seeing everywhere across the world. You're probably familiar with it. The housing crisis is a big topic here. Gentrification, we're all very familiar with that. And urban commons has been proposed or has been recently seen a comeback as an alternative to fight this segregation and inequality. And you might be wondering, what are urban commons? Never heard of that. So commons or urban commons are essentially an organization or a way to manage resources in a city, the urban spaces or urban resources collectively. So it goes beyond the traditional public versus private governance dichotomy. It's really about the citizens co-managing or co-owning a resource. And today they're understood as various different types of resources, material and immaterial ones you can think of as wikis, as knowledge, but in my thesis I'm focusing on more concrete ones such as urban gardens, collective housing, or markets, some types of markets. And in addition to fighting inequality and segregation, they also bring several other types of benefits, social benefits, economic benefits, environmental benefits, and they're also shown to promote resilience in those three topics. And if you think about it, they can actually contribute to achieving SDG 11, because all those things I just mentioned, they contribute to promoting more inclusive and sustainable cities. So they could actually work as a policy alternative for cities who are interested, well, I guess every city, in achieving SDG 11, becoming more inclusive and sustainable. There are some examples of cities who are already doing some policies that promote collective action, such as Bologna, Barcelona, and Amsterdam, which is where this case study took place. There's one problem, though. I've been talking about how they can promote inclusion, fight segregation, and all those benefits, but we don't really know if they're accessible at all. The whole premise is that they only drive that, can only promote inclusion if the most vulnerable population, the excluded, can actually access them. But there are diverging findings in literature about that, and we don't really know nothing about their access. So this is exactly what I attempted to explore in my thesis. So I had this research question here. I'm essentially looking at the different social, spatial, and policy factors that contribute to accessibility of the urban commons to understand if they can drive social inclusion. And the way I did that, essentially I started with this research framework where, like I said, the whole concept initially is, okay, the urban commons are inclusive, they drive inclusion if the socially excluded have access to them, and then reap their benefits and therefore are included. But they could face some material walls that avoid or hinder them from achieving this accessibility, such as issues with public transport or longer travel times or distance. And in addition to material walls, they can also face immaterial walls, which, based on the work by Rusty and Dayal, essentially considering social demographic factors that make people feel unwelcome in these initiatives, such as gender, ethnicity, age, or income. Yeah. And I've deployed this framework in a case study in Amsterdam. I studied 29 different initiatives. They all participated in this larger initiative called the Mint. And there were different types of commons in this initiative. In this case study, community gardens, housing commons, and market commons. Here are some pictures I took on the field just so you have a bit more concrete understanding of what I'm talking about. Market commons might be the one that's a little bit strange. They're essentially markets where they connect local farmers, organic producers to consumers directly. So what did I actually do? I started by reading a lot. There's a lot of literature on commons. And then I used a machine learning algorithm to classify the neighborhoods of Amsterdam according to census data, social demographic data. And really, I looked at tried to look for patterns in the location of urban commons in the city and the types of neighborhoods they're located in. Then I conducted a material accessibility analysis. Namely, I calculated the travel time to reach these initiatives from different points in the city and tried to understand the spatial heterogeneity of the access. And these two methods comprise what I call the material access stream of my research. In parallel to that, I conducted digital surveys with the participants of these commons, trying to understand what factors they perceive as barriers in material or material barriers of access, and what are the benefits and impact that they perceive by joining these initiatives. This is what I call the immaterial access stream of my research. And they both converged into a policy confluence, which was when I interviewed a policymaker, an expert on commons-oriented policy for the municipality of Amsterdam, to try to understand their perspective on commons and the potential barriers and opportunities to leverage or boost commons to achieve SDG 11. And yeah, with this, honestly, yeah, this methodology, I found that urban commons could indeed promote social inclusion. I found that the material walls and immaterial walls in this case study seem to be relatively small, but I also found that there was a factor missing in my analysis, a surprise factor that I'm going to talk about later. Yeah, and I think it also highlighted how urban commons can indeed become really help policymakers. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the results or the findings that support the results. Starting with the material access stream. So this is, the colors are weird. Okay. So this is the results of the classification analysis. And essentially what you're seeing in this on this map to the left is the different types of neighborhoods plotted on the map, right? The blue neighborhoods are neighborhoods that the algorithm classified, and they're essentially very low income. And they have a very high share of people with a non-Western migration background, more than 50%. And the red neighborhoods, I'm only focusing here on these two because of time reasons, but the red neighborhoods, they also have low income, also have a high share of people with a non-Western migration background, but not as much as the blue ones. What's interesting here is that almost 70% of the urban commons initiatives in the case study, which are the little crosses there, are located in red or blue neighborhoods. So essentially neighborhoods with a low income and ethnically diverse population. What's even more interesting is that the blue neighborhoods, so the more, perhaps the more socially vulnerable in a way, they are the ones that, sorry. I'm not sure what that was about. Yeah, and so the blue ones are actually the ones where there's more initiatives with such as urban gardens or parks and greenery, which if you think about it, have much more of a community-oriented benefit as opposed to market commons, for example, which are located in the other neighborhoods that didn't go into. Then I looked at the material accessibility, the travel time analysis, right? And you can kind of see in this curve graph to your left, the distances that people take or the time it takes for people to reach one of the urban commons in red across the city. And yeah, essentially from almost anywhere in the city, you can reach an urban commons in less than 20 minutes, except for the southeast and Weesp. Weesp in particular, I did not consider in my analysis because it only became a part of Amsterdam this year after I started my studies. So I'm disregarding it. And what's more, not working now. Sorry. More interestingly, if you look at the amount of population that can reach, the distribution of population that can reach urban commons in time, you'll see that 95% of the Amsterdam population can reach an urban commons in less than 15 minutes by bike. So the material accessibility seems to be very high and the material barrier is relatively low. Even more interesting is that if you actually look at the distribution of different ethnicities across the city, you can actually estimate the average time it takes for each ethnicity to reach one such initiative. And across all modes of transport that I analyzed, walking, cycling, driving, and public transport, people with a non-Western migration background were actually those who had the better accessibility, which makes sense since the initiatives are mostly located in the blue or red neighborhoods, like I was saying. So let's go to the immaterial access. I'll try to be quick because I think I lost some time there. So survey results. I got 49 responses from the survey. The typical respondent identified as female, as native Dutch, and earning less than 30,000 euros a year. The colors are really wrong. And in this, well, I directly asked them, how frequently do you feel discouraged to participate in an urban commons in the initiative you do because of these factors here? And the factors were, 6 of them were immaterial factors, so potentially immaterial walls of access, and 2 of them were material walls of access. And what I found is that 80% of the respondents never perceived an immaterial factor as a barrier. And even though the responses to material factors were also, well, they also rarely perceived them, they did so almost twice as often as the immaterial walls. So this would suggest that the immaterial walls are also relatively low in energy, in this case study. Then, moving on to the impact and benefit analysis, or assessment, where the respondents were asked what was the most significant change in their lives after joining an urban commons. And the overwhelming majority of responses referred to the sense of community that joining these initiatives gives them, the sense of belonging, and really getting to know their neighbors. So really a very localized feeling of belonging. Except for people who participate in market commons. Those are, again, when you pay a monthly fee, for example, and you have access to this particular market of local farmers. And for them, the greatest benefit of joining this initiative was just having access to cheaper goods, to the actual market itself. So again, much more personal or individualistic oriented than the community benefits of other types of commons. What's interesting though, is that in the people who participate in these more community oriented commons, such as urban gardens, parks and greenery, they rated the benefits of participating in the commons higher than other types of initiatives. They average 8.4 out of 10 versus 7.8 from other types of initiatives such as market commons. Now, a really interesting result. I also found that urban commons seem to indeed promote social inclusion. 6 out of 10 participants agreed or strongly agree with the statement, I feel more included in society as a whole by participating in the initiative. This is a very significant finding because, like I said, there is sort of a debate in literature about this, and to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that the people who participate were asked directly whether or not they feel included. So this is a pretty interesting result. Then, the policy complements. We've seen how the material and immaterial aspects of accessibility are, then they seem to be relatively low for this case study. Now, the interview with the practitioner or the city official from Amsterdam. Here are the main highlights of the interview. Essentially, I found that the municipality is very interested in promoting urban commons and really leveraging their benefit and their power. They actually have a binding commitment to do so. It's actually laid out in the coalition agreement, and it's actually also explicitly written in the city strategic vision or plan, having species for the next few years. And they plan to do so in 2 main ways. By promoting public collective partnerships when developing new projects, so going beyond the old, as the interviewee said, public-private paradigm, and also through urban commons ecosystem. This is a new concept that they're developing in the municipality of Amsterdam, and it's essentially an analogy to startup ecosystems, where you have this whole ecosystem of different initiatives and organizations and platforms that support, provide capacity, provide training for citizens or starting initiatives to really grow and be able to have this sustained growth and in time. But there are 2 main factors that can be challenges for that. The first one is the lack of trust, generalized in society, but also among commoners themselves and between commoners or urban commons and the municipality, as well as the lack of a legal framework. So the interviewer was explaining sometimes what happens is these initiatives or citizens want to start such an initiative in urban commons, or the initiatives want to grow and expand, but they don't have the resources, the knowledge, the skills to do so. And the municipality can't help them because they're not a legal entity. Urban commons, they're just some citizens in a way. So the municipality can't really engage with them legally, except for a few exceptions. Well, yeah, because they have this legal framework. But an opportunity to really boost urban commons in Amsterdam is the energy transition, because there is lots of political will, even on a national level. There is lots of investment coming in, and there is already a legal framework. So there's already legislation around urban cooperatives, which are a type of urban commons. So an idea that came up in the interview was to pilot these an urban commons ecosystem within the energy transition framework in a way, and then scale it out to other types of initiatives. And a final result, an extra result that I got was, well, when interviewing or when talking to the officials from the municipality, I also showed the results I had gotten for the material and immaterial access streams of my research. And in particular, we were talking about how I got few responses from people with a non-Western migration background. And they said they actually thought it made sense and that it was reflective of their experience working with citizens of the commons in Amsterdam. According to them, commoning and joining urban commons is a thing of the very privileged few, because you have to already have the resources, the knowledge, the skills to start or join such an initiative, or you have to be willing, or you have to be able to, for example, only work part-time or work or dedicate a lot of time and energy to these initiatives without any or very little compensation. So what I realized is that I should revisit my initial research framework and propose, this is what I have here, I'm proposing a new framework for studying the accessibility of urban commons and its inclusiveness. Is that in addition to a material and immaterial wall, there's also an ecosystem wall where people are at a systemic disadvantage to access these initiatives, again, because of poor supporting services from public or private sectors, but also because of the lack of, again, resources, skill, and knowledge of the citizens themselves. So, for example, even if we found that the material access in Amsterdam seems to be low, we found that people do not seem to feel prejudice against them when joining an initiative. They still might have to go around that ecosystem wall to actually access the commons and reap their benefits. And so with that, these results, they have societal and also scientific implications. Scientifically, it contributes directly to an ongoing debate in literature, and it does so with a new perspective, I would say. Not only this is a case study initiative including several different urban commons in it, I've conducted a mixed method approach, but also asked commoners directly whether or not they feel included. In addition, I'm also introducing a new concept of urban commons ecosystem to the literature. This seems to be something that's being developed by practitioners as we speak. And I'm also presenting a new framework to study the accessibility to urban commons. So it's in addition to the state of the art. And this policy can also be relevant for society because it can be used by policymakers to assess their own context and really think about what are the material and ecosystem walls they face in their own city, and then prioritize actions or policies accordingly. Similarly, this can also be used by urban commons themselves to really, again, be aware of their own inclusiveness and accessibility, and then address any issues they have or share any knowledge they have with other initiatives. There were some limitations though. Primarily, the focus on the survey was only conducted with people who already participated in urban commons, so there could be some survivor bias. I just learned yesterday that there's this thing called the lists panel or something to conduct large surveys here in the Netherlands, so this is something that could be used in the future. A balance also had to be struck between doing deep dive qualitative work with each initiative to get more nuance and context versus conducting a more quantitatively robust analysis that might be more relevant on the city official level, let's see, in the policy level, multiple initiatives. And again, there's a limitation that few people were surveyed and interviewed for this research. And I guess as often is the case with research, I now have more questions than I started with. So I do have some recommendations for future work. The first one would be replicating the same case study with an extended scope. So basically addressing the limitations I just mentioned in the previous slide. Also using this research framework I'm proposing to assess the accessibility of urban commons in different contexts and cities. So I think it would be very interesting to see how the walls of access vary, for example, in different European cities or even in very different contexts, such as in cities in Latin America, for example. There's also a flourishing commons scene. Also, conducting a systems analysis and an actual case study to really see how the different actors interconnect and interplay and see if there are any synergies and potential coalitions there, which could be really relevant if there is this idea of building an ecosystem. And finally, a great segue, developing an actual framework to study urban commons ecosystems. There is a large body of work on startup ecosystems. There seems to be a nascent field on social innovation ecosystems, but I couldn't find anything specifically on urban commons or commons in general. And they're essentially different because they have this collective aspect that goes beyond private and public. So there's a great opportunity there, as again, this is being developed by practitioners as we speak. And so there you have it. You see how urban commons, how accessible they are, what factors contribute to their accessibility. We've seen how they can actually drive social inclusion and how they can be used or leveraged by policymakers everywhere, essentially. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ettore, for the great presentation.
Was it too long?
No, it was perfect. So I'm going to give the floor to our audience. Does anybody have any questions?
Sure.
So many. Yeah.
Can you show me like slide 32? Because I had like a little point there, but I don't remember what I was about to ask. Yes, this one. So I'm wondering if you could give like a descriptive situation where this would happen, because I'm trying to like digest this. It sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but I'm just wondering if you have like an example to give in this case.
Yeah, sure. So, for example, we've seen that a lot of neighborhoods, more vulnerable neighborhoods, they actually have these initiatives or urban commons nearby. So that would mean that in theory, you don't face that material access wall. So let's say you can kind of go here and access that urban commons. Let's say that in that particular initiative is a very welcoming initiative. Perhaps everyone has the same ethnicity as you, I don't know. Or you don't feel there's any prejudice against you. This immaterial wall is based on something called the effect theory, where my voice is a bit cracked from yesterday. Sorry. Yeah, where essentially, the environment of the place has a negative effect on you, and you just feel discouraged to join or participate. So even if that is the case, you don't feel prejudice against you, you have an urban commons nearby, you might still not be able to join or access it. And I'll give you a counterexample now, actually. For example, there is one initiative that I visited, Newland, where it's a housing cooperative. All the tenants, former squats, now all the tenants are actually buying their own former squats and actually becoming legal owners of those apartments. But that was only possible because one of the original commoners was a girl who actually did her master's in law, and her thesis was about commons, legislation around the commons. So it was only possible because there was one person who was privileged enough to be able to go to higher education and graduate with the thesis exactly on that. So let's say if you wouldn't have that opportunity, if you have like if you have kids, if you have like a full-time job, you might not have the time to learn about those things. Or even more pragmatically, you might not have really the knowledge on how to manage or operationalize an initiative like that. So this is where the three walls come in. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Very good. Thanks for the explanation.
Sure. Yeah. Other questions? Emily?
There's one.
Well, first of all, congratulations. Really fascinating piece of work. I remember reading your proposal for this back in December and thinking it's very ambitious. So I can pull it off, but I think we are. So my question is kind of regarding the survey part of the study, and you mentioned the kind of breakdown of the type of participants you got. Obviously, there's some selection bias in the type of people who are going to respond to those sort of surveys. Were there any activities that you sort of undertook to try and get a broader reach of people, or any ideas you had potentially reaching more of those excluded groups to get, because that would obviously will potentially change.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So initially, I had only sent a link to the digital survey. I reached out to this overarching platform, the main, to see if they could distribute the survey. I also reached out by email to each one of the single initiatives. And the, let's say the response rate was very, very low. Then I also tried still visually reaching out to them by Facebook, honestly, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, everything I could digitally, I did. And also like joining Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, share the link there. And the response was still not as I expected. So eventually, thanks also to the great push by Igor, I actually visited the initiatives. I think it took a whole week or 2 weeks because there were a lot. And talked to the people and offered the chance, well, talked to them and asked them to fill out the survey and really understand the full context. And then I got a lot more responses, but I feel like only from the people I talked to. Like they said they would share the survey with other people who participated in the initiative and all that, but still, I don't think, I'm not sure what happened, but I don't think I got those responses. So yeah, I would, if I had more time, I would definitely change the strategy and do a much more on the ground approach to getting these surveys and talk to this group. Or even using that list panel thing. I discovered about it yesterday. Mikhail, the professor at Delft, was talking about it, that you have these people who just do surveys for you. I'm not sure how that happens, but maybe you could use that. And really, yeah, it would improve the robustness of the results, I think. Yeah. Thanks. Alex.
Yeah, congratulations. I think it was a really good presentation. I have two questions. The first one is more of a curiosity. Whenever you were on the neighborhood that has commons, based on your research, your studies, do you think citizens kind of understand that there is a commons there that I can participate, that I can belong, or is something that gets false by they don't understand what that is, or they don't feel that it's something that they can be a part of?
Yeah.
And the other one is similar to what Indy said. Regarding the immaterial walls, I imagine that some of those are much more difficult topics to discuss with the citizens or the members than the travel cost or the travel time. So maybe you could just give us a little bit more of how was your opinions and everything, because I imagine that would require more deeper reflections of why, for example, everybody on the commons is similar to me or not similar to me regarding gender, ethnicity, background. So did you feel some sort of, it would require you to be there for longer to gain some trust by them, or in case of the actual visits that you did? But both of them are more on the curiosity.
Okay, great questions. The first one, about whether or not people actually feel like there is an urban commons, their initiative they can participate in. I would say not an urban commons. I think this is a very academic term, perhaps, but they know there is something that, so actually, it depends. That's why I came to this slide. When visiting initiatives where we have neighborhood commons, like an urban garden that the actual neighborhood takes care of, or like a park where the actual neighborhood organizes themselves and do something there, then I felt like it was very, very clear that they knew that existed and they actually were very engaged with it. I could even sense like there was some pride involved in it, you know, like you had stickers with the names of the initiatives in some cases. It was something that they were really happy about. And I think this is reflected in the higher or perceived benefit, rating of the benefit they participate. In other cases, though, I don't think that was the case, in particular with market commons, because they sometimes are essentially just this door where you open and you have access to this large room where like once a week you have a market that people organize. And I also got responses from about the participation pattern, and I found that people who participate in neighborhood commons, parks, and gardens, and housing initiatives, they actually tend to live, at least the respondents to the survey, tend to live nearby those initiatives. So like they said, they go there by foot, and it takes them less than 5 minutes to reach it. So very, very local. People who participate in market commons, who responded to my survey, actually went by bike, and it took more than 15 minutes to reach there. So there wasn't this local connection, at least in my sample, this local connection to these initiatives. And I think it's also reflected in the lower score, even though it's still pretty high. Okay, so that was the first question. The second one, could you repeat?
Yeah, it was more about the immaterial walls. Do you think it was harder to get some more deep responses because it's harder to talk about? That's like an assumption that I have. might be harder for people to talk about ethnicity or other gender barriers, cultural barriers, than it is to say it takes me half an hour or it was me 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah, that is true. So, and that might be the reason why I had an open-ended question. Why do you feel like are the barriers for you to participate? And almost all responses refer to material barriers, right? I think that's like, so that's what comes to mind. But I had some other questions that try to assess that rather indirectly. Like what factors do you ever feel discouraged because of this? And for example, I actually got quite a few responses of people feel discouraged because of their income. So maybe I think I managed to capture that, although you're right, that is something that's sensitive. So again, I think that with a more in-depth approach, perhaps interviews, it would be interesting to get that. Maybe as a compliment, because I also think that having like the statistic and the more broad data is also very useful, because then you can actually, the whole idea is that actually originally was to compare. I was hoping to have lots of responses and compare that statistically with the material access results, which is not the case, but it's still very interesting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Or do you have any more time?
Yeah, one more question maybe?
Right, so this one's mostly a curiosity question, I think.
Yeah.
So you presented earlier that a lot of the comments tend to be biased towards like ethnically diverse and also relatively low income people. So I'm just wondering on the flip side of that thing, maybe I might have missed it. So regarding higher income native neighborhoods, could you say something about why don't they have these sorts of participation commons or even commons initiatives in the first place? Because there must be some reason to it than just like lack of income or lack of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't find any direct link or direct explanation. It's all assumptions, right? There is a lot of work in academia about how vulnerable communities and especially immigrant communities or descendants from immigrants, they tend to have a much tighter social network because they don't have like intergenerational connections or things like that. And so this might be an explanation as to why this sense of community is created. And in addition to that, these are all neighborhoods where, from the stories I got, it seems like it was just not very, the citizens had the perception that it was not very well taken care of by public administration, and then they had to do something about it. So they started an urban garden, or they got a permit to start an urban garden, or things like that. So I feel like the impression I have is that out of adversity, these initiatives are like a way to, and going back to resilience, to get more resilience and really to, improve their own condition. That's why I feel like this is also this divide between more neighborhood-oriented initiatives in the blue and red neighborhoods versus like market commons or other types of initiatives in the other parts of the city. That's what I thought about at least.
Right, thanks.
Thank you for your great question. Igor,
Yes. Daniel, just a clarification. Should I ask several questions? I'm going to go around and I have a question. Just ask one question, then go around.
no, just ask. Yeah, that's one question.
Okay.
I don't know, it's just that.
No, just I think
I'll stop you if I think I'm going too far.
All right. Yes, first of all, again, congratulations for your work. I think you indeed had a very ambitious plan from the beginning. I think what Alex mentioned about also doing a bit more qualitative work together with your statistical analysis, it's challenging. You don't see that many students that really try to go as far as you try to put these two together. And of course, you can always do more. We can see that you go aware of the limitations and how maybe focusing a bit more on the qualitative part would have enhanced your analysis. But I think after all, it was a good result to achieve. So yeah, congratulations. But I'm not here to congratulate you. Well, I am as well. But my main role is actually to give you the opportunity to defend and reflect a bit as well on your work, maybe a bit more critically. I wanted to focus a little bit on this new barrier that you came up with, right? And towards the end of your work on the ecosystem. area, which I think is quite interesting that you really got to that. You found that there are other factors that influence your work, and I think that's also partially connected to the qualitative part that you did and talking to the people and understanding that. But I wanted to hear from you because I was a bit puzzled that if this ecosystem wall isn't actually, you mentioned some kind of structural issues there, like access to knowledge or support from the municipality. But isn't this the precise inequality that you're trying to fight against with the urban commons? So I was puzzled to understand if this is actually not the context or what is actually what the urban commons are trying to fight against or that this to drive the social inclusion that you're talking about, and not exactly a barrier. So I wanted to hear from you a bit, maybe we develop a bit on this ecosystem wall and how does it fit on your framework?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's a great question because there's also, like, I think it can also be confused with the immaterial wall. But the way I define it and I see it is that the ecosystem wall is really about, it's almost like a meta wall. It's like the ecosystem, the systemic factors and issues that hinder people from accessing the commons themselves. So it might be related, it might be correlated, probably is, with systemic factors that put people at a societal disadvantage. But I'm specifically looking at the commons in this particular case, because that was something that was missing. Right? I was only looking at the material access, I was only looking at people's own perception of their, so let's say prejudice, for example. But there were in fact something else there. And I think that by laying it out explicitly like that as a wall, and because we're talking IPA and trying to involve policymakers and enable them, I think it gives a very precise definition, a very understandable path to address that wall. You know, like your city official, you can think, oh, so they have good material access, they don't feel prejudice against them, there's something else missing. There's this ecosystem wall. So how can I address that? How can I make, for example, create some sort of capacity building around, I don't know, the legal framework of joining or maintaining an urban commons? Or how can I provide training on financial management of urban commons? That's because essentially it's still an organization that needs to be sustainable through time, for example. So I think it's different from general ecosystem issues because I'm really looking at the access to commons in particular. And I think it also has a benefit, you know, on the policy making side to make it very explicit. As a result, it can be used by city officials. Does that answer your question?
Yes, well, partially, yes. I understand, but I was wondering, for example, okay, lack of training or lack of knowledge, if this couldn't be in the material wall and not part of the ecosystem, but as you explained, it's a thin line between it.
Yeah, so yeah, it could be an immaterial wall in the sense that it's intangible. But by the definition I'm using of the material wall, which is based on work by Rusty and Diane, it's all based on this effect theory, which is a social sciences, I think, or psychology, not sure now, term that is very much reflected on a personal feeling. We have these atmospheres, this ambience where you just don't feel welcome. And that's what I'm specifically referring to as immaterial walls. So this other ecosystem wall, I was originally going to call it privilege wall. Then after some reflection, I changed to ecosystem wall. Just to really highlight that, yes, it can be related, it's probably correlated to immaterial factors, to broader systemic segregation or inequality issues. But I think this framework, by really highlighting 3 key terms differently, allows for more analytical approach.
Yes, no, I agree. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I think it would be interesting to elaborate also in the connection between the ecosystem and actually the end inequality that you're trying to.
No, absolutely. And this is an exploratory work. Like I said, there is very, very little literature or any research on the accessibility to urban commons. So I think that's why I thought it would be really interesting to propose a framework, because then it can be further developed. You know, it can be used to in other case studies. I think it's just like a starting point. I think there's actually a huge field lots of research to be done in this area.
Right. I'm going to go for one quick question. So I was curious when I was reading your text, because you also mentioned quite often that urban commons can drive inclusion, social inclusion. But your results show that there's not that many barriers, right? That are there. So I was a bit in doubt about when urban commons doesn't drive social inclusion. So trying to invert a bit the logic, could you actually develop, since, well, the barriers are not there, so what is that it's actually undermining the work of urban commons to generate social inclusion?
That is a great question. So when does urban commons not drive social inclusion? Right.
If it's not the barriers, right, that you didn't see.
Right. Yeah, so I think there are two sides there. The first one is urban commons could drive social inclusion. That's, at least in the case study, that's the finding I have. So that means that people who access it, in theory, can feel more included because of that. So then it really highlights the importance of the access part, because then the whole point is who can access these benefits and the feeling of inclusion. Okay, so there's that. And the other thing is, I didn't really highlight in the presentation because I had the sample was so small, but the people the respondents who disagreed with that statement, I feel more included in society, you could argue they're actually the most vulnerable persons that responded. There are people who identified as non-binary in terms of gender. There are people who earn less than 15K a year. So almost across all demographic factors that I was looking at, they were among the most vulnerable ones. And they were the ones who did not feel included. Many of them were members of one particular case, urban commons. I had Coffee House in Amsterdam. It's essentially a cafe that offers homeless people the opportunity to volunteer and do service work for the community. And they have access to food and shelter and all that. So almost like helping the local community in a way. And these people did not feel part of society, for example, by joining urban commons, by joining this initiative. So I suspect that that's because the issue that makes them feel excluded is much more systemic. It's much more, there's a stigma there that perhaps just by reaping the benefits of common, or just by feeling part of the community, may not be enough to overcome this particular stigma. So this is more or less what my considerations are. Did I answer your question?
Partially, but
Thanks, Igor.
Yeah, thank you. So, Ettore, first of all, no questions. Really good work. Enjoyed reading the pieces. You have an excellent style of presenting your information. There's infographics, there's imagery, good visuals, very clear visuals. And I was very impressed that you condensed 260 pages into 60.
I was too.
Well, saved me the headache of not being able to fully this week. So, very interesting work and good work, and really interesting findings. And as it goes with these things, most of my questions have been asked and answered in some form or the other already. But I'm still going to push back on a few results, also bouncing off of your ideas. So the first one is, can you go to the slide of your new framework? Yeah, perfect. So again, going off of Igor's question about the ecosystem wall, whether it actually is a wall or the context, like the inequality and the adversity that makes people come up with these kind of ideas and build things more locally and democratize initiatives to help themselves. A lot of other research says that if people have the knowledge, if they have the social networks, if they have resources and skills to get better jobs, they will be lifted out of deprived conditions, right? And in a progressive municipality like Amsterdam, I would hypothesize that if people have these kind of access to networks, knowledge, information, resources, community groups, do they need urban commons at all? So by putting in that ecosystem wall and suggesting to the municipality that you can remove it or reduce it so people can access urban commons, would they then need urban commons at all to solve their problems?
That is a great question, and I think yes, because again, it goes because urban commons, from the literature of the perception I have from its users and the whole context, it's more than just a project or like a company. It's a really personal thing. It really has connections to the local environment, and it also has a very ideological perspective to it. Again, it goes back to fighting the right to the city and the just city, and going beyond the public and private dichotomy. Citizens being collectively part of the urban living thing that is a city. So I do think that yes, even in that case, I have some respondents who are actually there more than 50,000 euros a year. They are apparently not. They wouldn't need urban commons to feel included or to have access for economic benefits and so on. And still they do participate, I suspect, for ideological reasons. So I think, yes, it's it's like the interview was saying, it's this idea of promoting this collectiveness of the city as something that's as a response to all the issues that, to promoting more sustainable and inclusive cities, not necessarily as like one project that will help address these issues, but really a more humane in a way, more organic thing.
The other question that I have is, again, sort of hypothetical. So if you have unlimited time and money, consider that you've already done your thesis and you know what the limitations are. Now you can have as much time as you want and resources to pursue this again. How would you change your methodology, this mixed methodology approach, in terms of the accessibility measures for material access and interlegal access?
It is a great question. I really wish I had that. I would hire all of you guys to just kidding. Yeah. So first of all, I would not restrain myself to that already relatively big but still limited case study of 29 initiatives. I would look at many other initiatives that there are, which for, again, just to limit the scope, and just look at this particular domain platform, but I'll look at others. In the material access stream, I guess I would also conduct a much more thorough analysis, for example, including, I mean, this is just thinking, but I also include like the transit, the times of the trips, the costs to take public transport to these initiatives, for example. And the immaterial part, like I said, I would definitely, with unlimited resource, I would conduct several in-depth interviews with commoners instead of doing surveys, to get more stories and really try to break that trust barrier. I guess it was Juliana who was saying that there was other student who spent a week or a month in a community to get their trust and then do the research. So maybe do something like that, really engage with the commoners to get their trust and get more insightful responses. And with the interview with the policymaker, yeah, I would also try to interview more, because I feel like I was lucky enough to interview a person that was very knowledgeable, perhaps the person to interview. They were leading this initiative on using commons as a social innovation for the city, driving more inclusiveness, more sustainability. There are also other people in the municipality who work with commons. So it would really enrich to get these other perspectives within government. Yeah. It would take a lot of time, a lot of effort, but I'd be really, really interested in the results. I might also do something with the ecosystem. I'm sorry, I just think it's very fascinating. Coming from an industrial engineering background, I've done some things with startup ecosystems and the parallel in a more social and again collective world and scene. I think it's fascinating. So also do some more research that way.
It's about your central finding. So you say that there's low barriers, both in terms of material and immaterial walls for people. But most of your respondents, as you said, and I remember reading, is like 70% to 60% women.
Yeah.
From a Dutch native background.
Yeah.
Okay. can you conclude on that basis that immaterial walls of income and ethnicity are also low?
No, I can't, because the sample is small. That's why I always try to say it seems in the case study, because I don't think we can generalize it yet, because again, the sample is relatively small, and even the conclusions I drew, I only try to make a little bit more robust conclusions or on response where the overwhelming majority of responses tended one way or the other, but also very conscious that the sample was small and likely biased, not just by the type of participant, but also because, again, I only interview people who already participate. So I think it provides some early insights, but there's definitely, again, I wish I could interview everyone and talk to them and understand their perception. Yeah.
Thank you. Juliana, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have any questions?
I do. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, first, I also would like to congratulate you, Ettore, on reducing the report. Huge challenge, but I think you made it. Now it's really nice to read, actually. Also on reducing your presentation for a couple of weeks ago. Congratulations on that. I have one comment concerning the other questions. I have two short questions and a final reflective question.
So, Juliana, we're almost out of time, so maybe just stick to the most important one that you can fry Ettore with.
Yeah, I just want to, concerning the framework, I think it was really nice that you proposed, that you reflected on your results and you proposed a new framework. Many people have questions about it because it has not been tested, right? So I think testing this framework would be something very interesting. And my reflective question is about the energy transition. You said from the interview that energy transition could be a way to test the ecosystem and maybe develop urban commons in Amsterdam. But we also know that the energy transition often lacks a sense of justice. Many people perceive that energy initiatives are not for them because they are expensive. So it's basically considered something for rich people. So my question is, if this was discussed with the municipality, with your contact there, and if not, if you could reflect on that yourself, what do you think would be essential to kind of use urban commons to address a just energy transition?
Yeah, that is a great question. So in the interview, we didn't go in depth into the nitty-gritty of the energy transition. For example, in the case of whether it's just or not, because the whole idea that the interview was coming from is to use, for example, to make energy cooperatives or commons related to energy more inclusive and more accessible. And I think it's actually a great example. People might think that energy cooperatives or energy initiatives are expensive or not for them. I think that also is a great connection point to an ecosystem or to like local policymakers being able to support citizens in either joining or realizing they could join or realizing that exists, it's a possibility. And particularly in energy cooperatives where you have that shared access or ownership, I think it's actually a great example of how the local government can collaborate with national initiatives and really promote systemic support for people to join, in this case, energy cooperatives. And that way also making it just, again, because the whole idea of commons is to fight segregation, fight inequality. So with that commons framework in mind, I'm assuming the initiatives that the local government would make would be to propose or promote more equitable and sustainable initiatives in that sense. Does that answer your question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thanks.
So can we stop here, Juliana, or do you want to ask more?
No, it's fine. I'll keep some others. Thanks.
Thanks, Juliana.
Okay, thank you very much. So to prevent my, so I'm just going to ask one question, otherwise I'll just have it in my brain forever. I have a lot of questions. So I would actually, it's related to this ecosystem wall. And, you know, it's a follow-up of what all that the others said. But, you know, I really like this figure, Ettore, and the reason I like it is that I love this tunnel in the middle. And the way I understand urban commons is that, well, people are in search of like-minded people, and that's the whole purpose of it. You know, we just want to find a place where the duck lovers are, or the, I don't know, the Hindus are, or the non-binary are, right? And this ecosystem that you're talking about is actually, I would call it an ecosystem tunnel, because it's a privilege of, you know, of the urban commons, of finding the right people. And then the you know, like, so this, they're immaterial walls, but if you have this ecosystem tunnel to get to those like-minded people, it's actually a tunnel. Do you agree with this, or do you think I'm completely wrong?
No, I totally agree, because again, the idea for this extra wall is actually the contrary to an ecosystem that supports, like you said, a tunnel that supports this type of access to the initiatives. But because I'm looking at walls and I'm looking at, okay, let's help policymakers assess the issues and try to address them, I framed it as a wall, but I totally agree.
I mean, you could, you could call all this that you put, again, it was the question that Igor had. You could just put it in an immaterial wall and then just have this ecosystem tunnel with the positive side of things.
Yeah, I love it. I like it.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's go and publish. Okay, I'm not going to ask more questions because, yeah, we're already 5 minutes over time. So we're truly going to go to your room. Yeah. So just relax,
Juliana.
breathe. But Juliana have a.
I'll call her directly.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just leave that.
Thank you, guys.
Não vai ficar ouvindo cruzado.
You kidding questions were harder.
We should ask 5 questions, you say.
On the contrary, I was expecting much way easier questions from you guys.
I tried to keep you in the softball of it, so that no one else to
That's
ask.
good, that's good.
I asked the difficult questions and also.
Yeah.
Any here.
Are you still being heard?
What?
Is the call still on?
Yeah, no, but no one's on.
Okay.